So I'm going to start with my my two students here. They're not mine, but the two students are here, and there's some interesting stories. Devin, our first participant here, also known as Doodles. Yeah, that's her nickname. She is the founder of a letter writing service called Dear Doodles, and she started it when she was 13. Dear Doodles, if you didn't know, focuses on promoting kindness and empathy, two really strong, important traits for kids through letters, games, activities, trading cards, and animals. And she was quoted by saying, "The overarching goal for my company is creating a generation of kids in which kindness and inclusiveness is something that's not needed to be thought about." I thought that was really, really interesting. Let's give her a hand, please. Next, we've got Alex. Alex, also a Stanford student. He began his entrepreneurial career before arriving at Stanford also. He started a product called Quill, and it's an app that uses computer vision algorithms to take a photo. And what that means is takes a picture of a textbook page, but what he gets back is, and this is really interesting, a summary of the text, the gist, right? We've heard that term a few thousand times. And this was before his before his junior year of high school. He was motivated by his own personal experience with dyslexia and said the problem was getting the main idea off the page accurately inspired him to create the app. So let's give Alex a hand. And we've got, let's see, Mark is next, right? I can't see that. Yeah, Mark. So now we're moving into some of our seasoned veterans here. Mark is a managing partner of S-Cubed. He was also part of a managing partner for Sequoia. That's probably a name that everybody's familiar with. Global venture firm here in Menlo Park. Prior to that, and I love telling this part, he was at Intel for many, many years, a great training ground for all things corporate, I'm sure. But some of the companies that he helped found and bring to market, BillPoint, Pixelworks, QuickLogic, Documentum. I was a Documentum employee, Mark. I don't know if you knew that. Yeah, that was a great place. And also NVIDIA, who's moved in from graphics to supercomputers. Let's give Mark a hand, please. All right. Next. Sorry. My notes here. Layla Seika is the EVP of Mobile at Salesforce. She's sought after for her speaking and her writing, public speaking and writing. But more importantly about Layla is that she is credited of one of two people who convinced Mark Benioff to get the women at Salesforce paid equally. She's also responsible for the building of Salesforce Apps Exchange. If you're not familiar with it, that's a very important business apps marketplace. Let's see. We all know. Oh, we haven't gotten to David. We've got to go to John. John Okapini is a venture partner at Relay Ventures. He had 20 years of experience in entrepreneurial with enterprise software, marketing, sales. He's built helped hundreds of entrepreneurs, early stage entrepreneurs, build both web-based and e-commerce sites, enterprise applications. He's currently the CEO of NatureBox, and that's an online delivery service for home delivery and businesses for snack foods. And please give him applause, please. And we know David, don't we? All right, let's start with some of my questions. And I'm going to start here on the end with my two young entrepreneurs. You both talked a little bit about how you're, started so young. Why don't you start off real quick, Doodles, I'll use that term. Why don't you start off with how you've, how dyslexia is important in your life?
Wow, so many ways. I think being dyslexic really helped me be resilient and take my really big ideas and run with them, because it's something that it's just like, I think it's provided me with a lot of strength, and it's always to me been viewed as an advantage and a way for me to be more creative and a way for me to pursue my big ideas and get help with the little details. So I think
That's awesome. Thank you. Yeah. Alex, what about you? I mean, your app came from your need. What can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, so when I think about my dyslexia and a lot of the struggles I've faced with it, I think about it, I think about more how I respond to it and how I've responded to the struggles as kind of the important part and what I kind of go to. So my dyslexia, basically forced me to create a framework of thought, a framework of problem solving that I can then apply well beyond just, creating apps, well beyond doing well in the class. It was more, how do I, take an abstract, I'm struggling in class, ask why, get down to the fundamental reason, the first principles of what's causing me to struggle, and then from there, better understanding how I learn, being able to abstract from there, studying techniques. So it was less about the dyslexia for me and more, I have this struggle, everyone has struggles, it's how do I solve that problem? And it forced me to solve problems at a young age.
Awesome. Yeah. I think that's important. Thank you guys for starting. I know you're nervous, but you're doing great. So Layla, you hire people? You have people? Yeah.
We're sort of big now.
Yeah, I know. So I'm in your office. I come in for an interview. I'm an enterprise sales guy. Do I tell you I'm dyslexic?
Totally. I'm really open about being dyslexic. And when I grew up, it was like shame, right? You're stupid, You're lazy, you don't know what you're not, because anyone meant to. It just wasn't well discussed the way it is now. So I love it when people tell me they're dyslexic or tell me they're different in any way. It means they're going to bring a perspective we typically don't have into the organization.
And equally, you transmit that or communicate that to your team?
It's pretty obvious with me. I have ADHD too, so like when I'm going, it's like, so I'm open with my team too. Like, look, I'm off on a tangent now and just have to wait till I finish and then we can roll back. And in the same breath, I spent a lot of times in meetings just waiting for the 45 minutes to everyone else to get to the answer I knew we were going to do when I walked in the room. So it's tit for tat a little bit on that front.
We've heard that story a few times. I think there's a famous story about Chuck Schwab. John, what about you? And you're hiring, probably ramping up, getting ready to build a bigger.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about my first sales job interview. Excuse my voice. I didn't have any experience in sales. I went through a management training program at the bank after legal studies at Berkeley. And I walked in, this woman, her name was Shari Simon. And she had my resume, and I was like suit and tie, young kid. Walk in, and she took like 10 minutes, slowly, with a red pen going through my resume.
Oh, brutal.
And she just kind of like looks up at me and she says, like, you have no sales experience. What are you doing here? I said, are you looking at the same resume? Like, you got to read between the lines. I've been selling my whole life. And as a dyslexic, that's what I've been doing. I got that job easily. And I rose up to the
I knew it was the ponytail.
Yeah. So it was, but as it ties back to dyslexia, that was my strength. It was the people skills and the communication skills. And so I always kind of leveraged that. And then I found my lane in sales early on in tech. Now, as a CEO of a company, I'm really looking for sort of diverse set of skills and people that can bring context. I do need my COO next to me to kind of like do the stuff and get the
math,
get the Gantt chart together and kind of like, let's do this product launch. We got to get that done. But I also need people that really can kind of see the larger picture. I don't necessarily will index like, hey, do you have dyslexia? But I'm really kind of looking for that profile of people that kind of are not just in the weeds, but are really kind of getting the bigger picture for sure.
That's awesome. Mark, how has dyslexia affected your life?
So I guess in 2 ways. So I have 3 kids, 2 twin sons that are now 21, and a daughter still in high school. And one of my twin sons is dyslexic. He's now a junior down at USC, but he was diagnosed fairly early on, 5, 6 years old. So obviously having a dyslexic son is affected me. And in my time at Sequoia, we financed founders or co-founders of companies who turned out to be dyslexic. We didn't really know it at the time when we were writing that first, $5 million check, Series A check. But as you get to know founders of companies and you work intimately with them, you kind of figure out that they learn differently and they think differently than some of their other co-founders or other entrepreneurs. So I've seen from two perspectives. My son, who's now 21, he it's interesting. He's if I had to predict my three kids' careers looking forward, he'll be the entrepreneur in our family. He enjoys people. He can read people in a room much better than I can or my other kids can. And he has unique perspectives on social situations. He's very curious about business, and he just brings a different perspective to dinner discussions than my other two kids do. So he has, I think one interesting parallel between dyslexics and entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs can see around corners. I mean, they can see the future. They see markets and opportunities that us mere mortals can't see. And I think dyslexics in some ways operate in the same fashion, right? They can see around corners that people who are not dyslexic can't see. So I think there's some interesting parallels, and I'm seeing this sort of real time and watching my son develop from middle school through high school and now in college, and he's had his first couple of internships. And again, he views the business world and he views how a business operates, I think, a little bit differently.
That's awesome. So he's getting in the family business, maybe, or?
It's interesting. He has shown an interest in investing in company. He's very curious, asks me a lot of questions about our family office that I now operate, and he's much more inquisitive about that than the other two kids. So we'll see.
Yeah, that's awesome.
We'll see how the future.
I'm guessing, David, it's well known in your office, but what about your entrepreneurs that approach you? Do they know or do they reveal?
I'm very buttoned down and quiet in every other regard. So, I mean, Mark and I are on a board together. I don't know that this particular thing has come up, but maybe.
I don't think it has. I don't. Does Rajiv know?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the reason I started talking about this actually was sort of by happenstance, right? It never struck me that I was not talking about it. It hadn't really come up. Right. And some number of years ago, I was in a conversation like this for the executives of Silicon Valley Bank. And a question was asked of me that just made it obvious. The person who was interviewing me said, "Hey, David, in the venture business, it must be frustrating that there's so much information, you can never gather all the information, then you have to make a decision." It basically sort of implied an uninformed decision, right? And I thought about it for a second, and I said, I actually don't usually have all the content for a sentence, never mind like a decision. I said, I'm dyslexic, and so the reality is that dyslexics are always gathering whatever information and filling in the blanks with their brains. And so in some ways, that's the very best possible job for a dyslexic. I had literally never pointed it out in this context. And after that particular event, one of the executives came up to me and said, "I just want to thank you." And I said, "Oh, sure, great." He said, No, I'm going to go home to my daughter tonight and talk about this fact that you'd talked about this and that you viewed it as actually a trait that was helpful to you because she's dyslexic and we've been having these things. And so thank you. I really appreciate that. And it sort of woke me up to, gee, it will be a better world if I actually spend more time working hard to talk about it instead of waiting for the context to come up.
Right. Rather than this.
It's interesting. I think from our family, I had the benefit of seeing sort of my sister's dyslexia ahead of me, and my parents really kind of, scaffolded her. She couldn't read after high school. She got into college, and they were there with her, for helping her study and so forth. She was actually, I believe, one of the first dyslexic kids to ever get recordings for the blind. So when I got into and I got tested, I started just really sort of pushing my own. And then as I'm going forward, I'm thinking about my kids. And what's interesting is I just kind of live with it, right? We kind of like live with it day to day, but I don't think about talking about it as much as but recently, when I took over as CEO of NatureBox, we acquired the business, and I stepped into the CEO job, and I'm in the first exec staff meeting. Like, I have like 6 people sitting there staring at me. Who's this guy? John. And so in prep of that meeting, it was an offsite meeting, I studied Lynn Cicconi's 5 dysfunctions of a team, and how do you actually build a team. And there's a pyramid, and at the bottom of the pyramid, the core base is vulnerability. Because when you're vulnerable, you can actually have constructive conflict of conversations, which then can lead to commitment, and then everyone kind of gets together. So the exercise was to discuss, something about you that other people don't know. And I said, well, I have dyslexia. And everyone looked at me like, oh no.
We're in trouble. We're in trouble. We're going down. Yeah.
Who is this guy? And but what ended up happening is that's my superpower, And I may not know all the details, guys, but we're going to figure out the patterns here. We're going to figure out what's working, and of course we've started on that path. But talking about that was actually really helpful for my team, opened them up, and I'm feeling it's important to talk about this stuff in larger settings.
So Layla, I wanted to ask you about that conversation with Mark. Do you feel like the challenge we face as a community to promote our superpowers, is there a similar track there? I mean, do you feel like you have to do that at Salesforce?
Is there? If you're dyslexic, and my kid's dyslexic too. That's when I started. I was like, okay, it's on. Like, I'm talking about this more. Look, that conversation with Mark took a lot of gumption. I didn't realize it at the time, honestly. We sort of just felt like this is the right thing to do. Like, how can anyone think it's okay not to pay the women the same as the men? Like, that's just crazy. So stupid. I mean, what the hell? It was, and I found myself in this really unique position where someone I'd been really close friends with for 20 years, well before Salesforce. We both sort of got elevated up at the same time. She became the head of HR. I took over one of our business units. And we were talking about what can we do for women, and this had been bothering me for years. So when we went to Mark, I didn't realize how courageous it was, but it was really courageous. It changed the whole face of our company. It changed the industry. A lot of really interesting things happened. I think being dyslexic was probably part of it. I have a fierceness, right, that other people just don't have. Like, at a certain point, I'm like, throw it. I'll just throw myself in front of the train if I actually think it's worth it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. And he's not known for his, flexibility.
He was funny. He was like, not true. And I was like, man, maybe true. And then he was like, not my company, not the way we built this company. And then he was like, you two make a lot of money. And we were like, that's not the point. Like, that's not what we're saying. But he was, this is where, you need allies. You need white male allies, quite frankly, a lot more than we give them credit for. They still run the world, last time I checked, sadly. Or good, bravo, love Sequoia, no problem there. But yeah, Mark was an ally. Mark stood up and did what no one else would do. And to be a CEO, billionaire of a Fortune 100 company, and to stand up and say, we're gonna do a pay audit. Like, I said to him at the time, I was like, if you do this, no one in Silicon Valley can hide anymore. Like, if you stand up and we're first, like, no one can. And sure enough, it's become something that's definitely part of the dialogue all across the Valley now.
Yep. Mark, what would you give these 2 young entrepreneurs as advice? What would you tell them? What should they do? If they're coming to your office, let's say, what should they do? How should they think?
Well, I think, first of all, there's no substitute for hard work. I think there are no shortcuts.
Yeah, I'll type it
Write this down?
Yeah, okay,
There's no shortcuts in starting a company. It's hard work. It's 24/7. And that'd be my first piece of advice. I think also no matter how smart or talented or experienced you are as an entrepreneur, you want to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you are, and that everybody has blind spots, right? Some people.
That's easier for some of us than others.
Right. I mean, some people are really good in coding or developing a product. Some people are really good in selling the product. Some people are really good at numbers. But to build a sustainable company, a great company like Salesforce, for example, you need a wide array of talents. And most entrepreneurs, don't know everything about marketing and sales and finance and et cetera. So they need to bring in people, recruit people as part of their team that can complement their skill sets. So I think that's super important. When I was at Sequoia, one of our tests for entrepreneurs was, we would test to see if they know what they didn't know, because if they came off as a know-it-all, authoritarian sort of approach, that turned us off, and we ended up not financing those folks. We wanted people that listened to advice. We wanted people who were inclusive, who built great teams, and I think that's super important as a young entrepreneur, is to recruit really great people around you. So.
Great. Did you guys have questions for them?
So can I tell a amazing entrepreneur story that
No. Okay. I've had enough of you.
So I met this smart young woman, and actually she wasn't pitching her business. She pitched me on her business later, but she had an idea for a nonprofit to try and help women succeed in a culture where relationships mattered, et cetera. And so before she met, and I'd been introduced to her by a great friend, and I said, great, love to talk to you. And before she came, she sent me a link and said, here's a blog post, this will give you context, so give a read and then we'll catch up. So she comes in to the meeting, we sit down, she said, so did you get a chance to read it? And I said, I'll tell you the truth, I'm actually dyslexic. I opened it and it was too long, and I figured we'd talk about it. And she said, okay, fair enough, and blah, blah, blah. We had a good conversation. We had this conversation. She was sort of a force of nature. I thought she was very talented and very thoughtful, and I was already inclined to help her. And we said, great, and I'll catch you sometime soon. And she left, and within 15 minutes, I received an email of her recording of her blog post.
Whoa.
Said, are you kidding? Are you kidding me? Like, you understood, you didn't just hear it. Yeah. You're like, oh, this is a thing. He would have listened, he would have done it, but it's an impediment. I can solve this impediment, whatever. So I called her up. I said, I'm with you. I went on the board of the thing. We raised a bunch of money. Like, she's just a force of nature. And the reality is, if you are that kind of person, you understand the requirements, and you'll break through walls, and you're empathetic and smart and whatever else, you'll achieve a lot. And it turns out that if you record a thing for a dyslexic, they'll help you.
There's a sub-moral to that story, what basically you're saying.
A smaller sub-moral.
So for my two students, you're both going here, right, Stanford? Maybe tell us what works really well being dyslexic, and then maybe what's not working. I mean, we don't want to talk bad about Stanford, but what's working really well for you? How's it going?
I love it here. It's great. But I think what works really well is, I started talking to OAE, which is the Office of Accessible Education, before I came here. Throughout high school, I was always my own advocate and just talked to my teachers constantly. Kissed a lot of ass. It was great. They were all amazing. So I think coming here, just going to discovering the resources that they had for dyslexics, and going and actually utilizing those resources and being able to learn in my own way. And after it was so nerve-wracking in my first class 2 months ago or whenever I started, I walked to my first class and I was like, hi, I'm dyslexic, here's my thing. And they're like, okay. And I was like, cool. So then just getting all the accessible materials and figuring out how you learn so that you can best succeed.
So you know how to advocate, is what
Yeah.
you're saying. Good.
I can talk.
Awesome. You've been here longer, though. How many? You've been.
I'm a sophomore.
You're a sophomore.
A little
Okay,
bit
yeah.
longer.
Freshman and sophomore. Sorry.
Yeah. I think one thing that's quite special about Stanford that works very well as someone with dyslexia is how much freedom and flexibility and independence the Stanford curriculum gives all students in how we select our classes and what we do. So I have, a lot of things I struggle with, and I have a very clear model for how I learn how I perform best, what type of classes I perform best in, what are the things I frankly just love to do. So I was able to design my whole curriculum not around what do I want to major in and what classes do I need to major in that. It was, what do I want to do with my life? I want to build great companies. How do I harness the resources Stanford has, given the things I struggle with? Right, dyslexia, doing long reading, stuff like that, right? Figured out, long readings are very difficult for me. Figured out, what are the classes I need to take to be able to do well in those classes, learn, get a lot from those classes, and do well in the things I do in life. And then once I have that framework, what are these classes I do? Then I'm like, okay, what major do I end up with? And it's a totally different framework of thought than I think what a lot of other schools would do. And it works really well given that I'm dyslexic. And if I just had a set list of classes that I'd have to do, it could make for a very frustrating college experience. Because many classes I'll end up in, and it can be, I'll sit in a class and I'll work, and I see everyone else finishing these assignments with ease. And it can be incredibly frustrating. But knowing that I have complete flexibility for how I morph my schedule and what I do, and making sure every class I take can root me back to everything I do, I can answer, why am I doing this? And I can root that why back to what I want to do, in life.
Awesome.
And that, I think, is really powerful, and that's something that Stanford, I think, does incredibly well.
That's great. Yeah. David, you went to Stanford? What degree did you get? I forget.
My degree is the most useful Stanford degree ever, a degree in computer music.
Is that in the catalog? I was looking through the catalog.
No one's laughing.
Yeah, you won't find that. You
I
won't
see the
find that.
building.
To this point, right? I got to Stanford and sort of said, well, I guess I'll take the things that I'm excited about and engaged in, and we'll see where that goes. And where that took me was to a degree in computer music. I had been taking music classes and technology classes, and it turns out there was a class in psychoacoustics and psychophysics, which seemed pretty interesting. And by the time all was said and done, essentially, I landed on this thing that could be described, again, and if one were to sell it as such, as a degree in computer music. And my thesis, and this was, because gosh, thesis, that's a problematic thing for a dyslexic, unless you're a computer music major and your thesis is an electric violin that you build, then it turns out it requires very few words. So my thesis was literally an electric violin that controlled synthesizers in the day when that wasn't really a thing, which was both fun and played to a bunch of things that I could get away with. And so it was a lucky set of circumstances.
John, you told me about your kids, and can you talk a little bit about the education experience and what you learned from all that?
So having grown up with parents, my father went to Stanford, flunked French. We had an indication he was dyslexic. My sister was diagnosed. I was diagnosed, and so it was just sort of known that we were going to have kids with dyslexia. And as we went through it, my first two daughters graduated. They went through a very, very rigorous school here in Palo Alto, and went on and have now, one's in great job, one's at USC, legitimately at USC.
Waiting for that joke. I knew that joke was coming. I thought I heard it this morning. I don't know where Nicole is. She's probably...
But my younger son, was struggling in reading, right? So we go, oh, here we go. We thought, okay, the third one, let's get this right. And so he was tested, and he was wondering, what's wrong with me? Basically, there's this question of what's wrong with me. And so we had the test, came back, and we sat him down. We said, this is the best day of your life. This is great news. You actually had dyslexia. It's amazing. Like, he kind of like something melted off his shoulders. The next day he went to school and his teachers were like, he's doing super well. Like, nothing's wrong with him. He just like has this learning difference. And so it's really breaking through the psychology of the ego, right? The ego tells you like, what's wrong with me, my insecurities, and like, how do you kind of break through that and actually give them confidence, and confidence through example of seeing his sisters really, crush it in school. There was another story where we were at one of these schools right down the street here, and we were brought in, freshmen. My daughter was going into freshman from middle school, and there was the head of the school, middle school, all these people, and with the parents and the child, and they're basically saying, listen, you probably should go check out another high school.
Thanks for playing, but
yeah, but like, the grades are really kind of like, you're coming into the last semester, her grades are right on the edge. We don't know if this is gonna be the right place for your daughter. And so, my daughter came in, she helped her with her Anne Frank project, we got her grades up, and then eventually what she started doing is she started advocating. She has an amazing personality. She talked to all of her teachers. She ended up being like a 4.0 student at this school.
That's awesome.
It was an amazing accomplishment for a dyslexic kid. But she did not read. Like AP, exams were like, she was just watching video after video after video, getting this information in. But she knew the material better than anyone in that class. And so super proud of that, and super proud of but it took the work and advocacy. I even wrote I did a video of like a pen cast where I basically do a voiceover where I was drawing my daughter's brain and explaining the decoding feature in her brain versus the language part of her brain. And then I would send that 10-minute video to teachers when she was in 9th grade. Because when you go to the parent-teacher conference, you get like 5 minutes. Yeah, and maybe you get another meeting, which is 20 minutes. Like, you're never really going to get the information to them. But if the father's willing to put a 10-minute video together, they're going to watch the video. And it turns out I learned from the video myself. I've read the book, and it was like trying to So it takes that level of advocacy. I think maybe things are changing. So.
Hope so. Layla, how about your children?
Yeah, so mine's 11, and he's really dyslexic. He still can't read. And he was, when we figured it out in kindergarten, and he was very confused too. He was like, what's wrong with me? And we came up with all these ways of talking, like, you're building hero muscles. Just because your friends don't have this trouble, one day they're gonna have something, and when it happens to them, they're gonna be more rocked than you are. And we had a lot of that. But at one point, I would always be like, look at me, dude. Look at me. Like, my husband doesn't work, right? He stays at home. I was like, I'm the one at work. I'm the dyslexic one. You can do anything you want to do. Like, don't play into the hype. A little bit. With little kids, too, because it's really easy to get classified. And I thought I was stupid for a long time. I knew I wasn't, but so much external. I grew up in the 70s and 80s. This was not like, this didn't happen, right? It was like in the back of a psychiatrist's office, like, okay, here's the bad news, parents. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna eat some more, because that feels good for a hot minute. But this wasn't happening. So I think for my kid anyway, I wanted to make it normal. And I was like, look at Richard Branson, look at Albert Einstein, look at and he also has ADHD, so I was like, look at Simone Biles, look at Michael Phelps, look at all these people that have all these differences and excel when they focus. So I just didn't want him to feel like he couldn't do something because society was saying he was different. Like, that's not my jam.
Yeah. Mark, you talked a little bit about your children's experience. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what it was like at the defining moment of figuring out what to do?
Yeah, so when you have twins, like we have, and twin boys, there was just a sharp contrast, which actually made it more difficult.
Yeah.
Our other twin son is very just bright and was at a young age was able to read at a very young age and do math at a young age, and almost prodigy-like. And so that sharpened the difference between the two. And Sean was diagnosed, like I said earlier, around first grade. And fortunately, he was at a school where the teachers were trained to look for learning differences and kids that were struggling. I think kids that are in schools where the faculty are not trained to look for this, I think end up getting diagnosed much later in life. And And so fortunately, he was diagnosed at 6, and he ended up going to Charles Armstrong, which is a school I'm sure many of you know. And it's a great school. And he felt at the time like he was being pulled out of this mainstream school, and he didn't really know why, and was upset, and was seeing his brother just sort of, do very well in the classroom. But as he spent several years at Armstrong, and then for middle school, sort of went back into that same school he was at when he was in first grade, and when he came back, he had the tools to. He was well equipped to deal with his dyslexia. Somebody mentioned earlier about advocating. He is a very strong self-advocate. I mean, now he's 21, and he knows how to advocate with faculty members and advocate for things that will make his life easier. And so, but it's a long journey. It was a long journey for him. But now he's doing very well, and I think he'll have a very bright career in front of him. He's not going to be reading he's not going to be reading long business plans or long manuscripts, but he has found ways to get the information he needs to make a decision and to perform well on tests and things like that. But having the twin relationship made it even more difficult.
Yeah.
My wife's, I think, is slightly dyslexic, probably undiagnosed. My father-in-law, my brother-in-law, probably dyslexic. Again, this is back 30, 40, 50 years ago. I think a large percentage of the population who had learning differences probably went undiagnosed because teachers and people were not trained to look for this. So it's been a sharp contrast in our family, especially with the twin thing. It was very difficult for a few years when the boys were very young.
Because they have that, I'm not an expert on twins, but they have that symbiotic relationship, almost sort of, They
it's a symbiotic relationship, but it's also a competitive relationship.
I was just going to say, the second part.
Especially when you have same-sex twins, you have this competitive relationship. Now, Sean, my dyslexic one, turns out he kind of compensated for that when competing with his brother. He knew he couldn't compete with his brother in terms of being able to read a book quickly or anything, but better in sports, and much better socially, even to this day. I mean, he's can walk into a room and is very aware of people in the room and has great. He's an extrovert. My other son, introvert. So they're very, very different. So my dyslexic one he's kind of figured out, hey, I have advantages in these other areas that my brother doesn't have, and so, but in the early days it was a real struggle for us as parents to sort of help to negotiate that and make sure they didn't kind of kill each other.
Which is true with most
twins.
Yeah, I was going to say,
yeah.
So I'm going to ask a question for you two to this team here. As you enter the workforce, so we have a couple of board members, a CEO, an senior executive, a Fortune 50 company. What can your influence in your businesses as leaders, what can you do better to help the dyslexic entering? And I want to preface this by saying, you're not quoting HR for Salesforce or
I never quote HR for Salesforce.
I didn't want to put you on the spot like you got to respond. Same with you. It's not about NatureBox. But is it what could you do as board leaders, as CEOs, as an EVP, better at your companies to support these two young future workers? Dave, you want to start?
Well, my view of business in general is helpful in this regard because I think that ultimately relationships are the things that are drivers, right? The world of transactions, the world of resumes or whatever is a world that is definitely stacked against people who have differences, it's stacked against women, people of color, et cetera. So I think that it's sort of an obligation to open the doors, and it's an obligation to be purposeful, and so that's certainly the conversation I have at frankly all of my companies, and I'd say that Silicon Valley is getting better. I think that thoughtful CEOs view this as an opportunity, not as a challenge, and so so there are companies that don't care, and those are companies that will not gain the value of great people. I think they're fleeting, and then they will ultimately be at a disadvantage. There are companies that are open but don't do anything proactively, and frankly, there's not a huge distinction between those first two categories, and with as far as new entrants into the workforce are concerned, and then there are companies that are purposeful, right? And so, the fact that Mark has been as thoughtful and forward-looking, I'm on the board of GLAAD, and he was, we honored him at the GLAAD Gala, and he's speaking out for the LGBT community, speaking out for women in business. That's the kind of leadership that leads to people coming to you purposefully, and I hope that all of my companies will take that view, and so I'm an advocate. I think that the CEOs are advocates, and I also am very clear with them that this is very selfish. This is pure capitalism. This isn't you doing something for the sake of anything other than your successful business.
Interesting perspective, yeah.
Yeah, I think that we need to just have diversity, across all dimensions in our company, because we're stronger for it. And so making sure that the process in the front end of this, the interview process is not biased against, looking at diversity. Dyslexic student may have auditory recall that's really slow, and and they may not perform well in a verbal interview, but if they demonstrate, resiliency and they persist, that's the way, to get in the door. Yeah, I think that's the key, is just sort of being open and making sure that the systems of process for interviewing are not biased. And I have some people on my team that everyone kind of views the world through their own lens and their own experience. I have folks that scored perfect SAT scores, and they're really, they do quants, and they're amazing, but I don't necessarily want a replica of you. I need to share the diversity and have a diverse, interview process that allows us to bring in other people and their talents.
And that's about training, right? That's about helping those recruiters and HR people understand.
Yeah.
I mean, I think talking about it's really important. So we have these things called employee resource groups, ERGs at Salesforce. One of them is called Ability Force. It really focused on people that had physical disabilities in the workplace. And when my kids started feeling like he wasn't normal, which was my biggest fear before I had kids, that they were going to get dyslexia, and then one of them was going to have this terrible I'm not normal feeling, because I hated that feeling as a kid. Then I went to Ability Force with a colleague who's also dyslexic, and she and I had talked about it for years. And we said, we're going to do a town hall on dyslexia and invite the whole employee, whoever wants to come. 700 people dialed in or were there, and we got hundreds of emails afterwards, I'm dyslexic, my kid's having this trouble. And the funny thing is Salesforce has tons of resources for people to help them with all these things, but a lot of these people didn't know and were afraid to ask because they thought they'd be somehow labeled strangely. So Ebony and I standing up and doing that for an hour brought about all this discussion, and now Ability Force sort of extended itself beyond the charter of just physically disabled, but everyone who sort of sees things different and has differences. So I think that's really important. And all these people, these are amazing people. So are you two, on your way, right? But holy smokes, ballers on this end, right? And all of us yep, dyslexia is totally normal. He thinks it's his superpower. My mom's dyslexic, I'm dyslexic, my kid's dyslexic. His wife, it sort of runs. If you have it, you're probably going to have it for a while down the generations, right? So making it normal makes it a lot easier for those of us that live with it every day.
Mark, is it a strategic advantage, like David said? Is it?
Yeah, I think it can be. To this point of, I think in this world that's obviously more global, and as we all are in either financing companies or running companies, the strength of a long-lasting, enduring organization, I think, is to have diversity across many dimensions. I mean, to me, diversity and inclusion is multi-dimensional. It's not just one-dimensional or even three-dimensional. And so one of the things I've observed in companies that I have financed is that folks who have learning differences, who are dyslexic, bring a special element of creativity. And whether you're developing software, you're developing, in the case of a place like NVIDIA, we're developing very sophisticated graphics devices. Having these folks who have that different sort of creativity on the team, whether it's on the marketing team or on the design team or the sales team, is super important. And I've seen that successfully be in action where dyslexics are key. At NVIDIA, we have one particular senior engineer. He's been with the company a long time. He's dyslexic, and he's been a key contributor in the company's entry into artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I think this particular individual brings a different perspective to NVIDIA's presence in machine learning that we wouldn't have had otherwise. So, and there's other examples of companies I've been involved with that with somebody who was dyslexic was just brought that different perspective in a group setting or in a board meeting, and I think that's super important to recruit and retain those sorts of folks in companies.
That's awesome. So I'm going to put you two back on the spot as we close out. What did you learn today? What did you hear? What's the I'm driving home, or I guess in your case, biking home or walking home. What did you learn? What's the thought going over Doodles? I'll start with you. I love that nickname. It's like some kind of...
Thank you.
Yeah.
Got it in 5th grade.
Yeah.
Very exciting.
What'd you hear? What'd you hear all these powerful people say?
I just think it's amazing to have so many people who have dyslexia and talk about dyslexia in one place. I mean, I'm definitely someone who talks a lot about dyslexia because I feel like it brings people together, and I'll say something or do something, and then I'll be like, I'm a dyslexic, and then everyone else will be like, oh, I'm dyslexic, I have ADHD, I have all those things. And I just think it's interesting that it continues on, and it can continue on, and I think that there's, from hearing you guys talk, I think there's definitely a shift, luckily, to people being more open to people who are like this conference, Strengths of Dyslexia and Neurodiversity, people who have a bunch of different types of way of learning, of thinking, of sharing, and just making sure that everyone understands that this is a strength, and all the other learning differences are also a strength, and if you don't bring people together who are really different, then you're not going to go anywhere. And I think that's what a lot of your companies and the companies that you guys have funded are pushing and figuring out, and I just think it's awesome that there are people out there who are really thinking about it and discussing it, and yeah, it's gonna make it easier for me when I'm older.
There you go, an advantage.
Yeah,
that's
good
awesome.
advantage.
Yeah.
What'd you learn? What'd you hear?
This has kind of been alluded to by many of the people on the panel. I don't think it's been discussed explicitly, and that's when it comes to dyslexia, when it comes to overcoming dyslexia, when it comes kind of to the struggles you face, whether it's, when you're a little kid learning to read, whether it's, you're in a meeting with a VC and she sends you a blog post, it's the idea of success of overcoming a problem. It's not oh, can I do it? It's just, here's a problem, I'm going to solve it. When I was, this is something I've seen a lot, I saw a lot in my own life, and I don't think I could have built a company without it, and that was without being dyslexic. Because, when I was a freshman, I've always been, when I was younger, I was really bad at writing. I was really, 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 really bad at writing and reading, really bad. But in my mind, it was never oh, I'm a bad writer. It was just, okay, I made a decision, I'm gonna be a great writer. That's just a decision I made, and I'm gonna do everything, and that's just everything you possibly can to make that happen. And that same methodology of here's a problem, I'm just gonna solve it. You're gonna move past it. That same methodology you use building companies, talking to VCs, right? You know, getting equal pay, all of that is just like, here's a problem. We're gonna solve that problem, no matter what it takes. And I think that's something you see and learn very clearly when you have dyslexia, when you have a learning disability, and you can apply it so broadly to everything you do in life. And I think that mentality and that way of thinking is incredibly important, and I think it's something that everyone will learn at some point. Everyone faces struggles, everyone faces hardships. But you know, when you're a freshman in high school, and there's very clear differences between you and other kids, or getting A+ in some classes and struggling for C's in others, it's like, okay, here's a problem, we're gonna solve this problem. Like, we're not gonna fail. Like, there's just no concept of failure. It's just like, we're gonna do it.
Grit.
And like, wake up at 6 a.m. and leave at 10 p.m. and all of that, and it's just gonna.
Yeah.
And they're
That's what it
smiling.
comes
Do you know
down
why
to.
they're smiling? Because you said that? Because that's what they want. You want that grit, right?
Take action.
You want that, yeah. You want an executive, you want a business leader, you want to fund a guy like that and they're gonna just get it done, right?
But you can't do it by yourself.
There you.
Which I
Can't
think
do it by yourself. I don't know if you heard her.
definitely something that you guys have talked about is dyslexics have their strengths, and there's also parts of dyslexia that isn't that strength. And I think what you guys have all like talked about and learned is like, you need to build a base of people to rely on, and people that can help you do the things that maybe aren't you're the best at. And I think honestly that's one of the most important things about dyslexia, and the most important things that we've talked about is like, it's like the empathy that you build and the ability to connect with people and the ability to share that, like, this is what you have, this is who you are, and you're gonna bring so many things to the table, but other people are gonna bring the things that you are lacking, and you have to trust other people and talk to other people, and you can't do anything by yourself.
Awesome, well said. So did you guys bring business plans you can hand out and resumes? Maybe
So you're hired.
Yeah, I mean, they're right here. I mean, right, David? You get guys at the gas station handing you business plans. I think you told me one time, right? Or the movie theater, oh, Dave, hey, I got this thing. Oh, it's like a script, right? So anyway, please give this panel a wonderful round of applause.